Keep an eye out for it. Today's show was produced by Denise Guerra, edited by Jolie Myers, fact-checked by Laura Buller, and engineered by Patrick Boyd. I'm Ested Herndon. This is Today Explained.
We're a minute away from 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening here on News 88.7, where support comes from members like you and from White Oak Music Hall, presenting Big Thief Somersaults Live 360 Tour this Friday. Tickets and more information at whiteoakmusichall.com. From Asia Society Texas, presenting its annual night market event featuring food, art, shopping, and sumo wrestling demonstrations. Friday evening, 6 to 10. More information at asiasocietytexas.org. And from Alley Theater, performances of A Christmas Carol presented by UT Health Houston begin November 16th and feature Ebenezer Scrooge and the spirits who teach the meaning of the holiday season. More information at alleytheater.org. Northbound 288 still have that ongoing wreck cleanup at Southmore and a wreck reported Southwest Freeway northbound at Shepherd. This is your NPR station, KUHF Houston News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston. It's 8 o'clock.
Good evening and welcome to Houston Public Media's special election coverage, Your Vote, Your Voice. I'm Ernie Manouse, and in the studio this evening with me is Houston Public Media politics and government reporter Andrew Schneider and UH professor and host of Houston Public Media's Party Politics, Jeronimo Cortina. They'll be with me throughout the hour as we explore and look at the races, some early numbers that are coming in, and what the feeling is across Harris County. We have field reporters spread out, Bianca Seward, Dominic Anthony Walsh, Michael Adkisson, and Natalie Weber will be reporting from in the field to keep you in the moment. Polls closed about an hour ago and results are beginning to stream in. We'll also be talking with Harris County Clerk Tanisha Hudspeth. All that and more is coming up over the next hour as we keep you informed of what happens when people go to the polls and let their voice be heard.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Ryland Barton. Democrat Abigail Spanberger will be Virginia's next governor, according to a race call by the Associated Press. Spanberger defeated Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears. She'll be Virginia's first woman governor. Ballots are still being counted in the New Jersey governor's race. Voting just ended in New York City's mayoral election, and polls close later tonight in California's referendum to redraw congressional maps to counter redistricting in GOP-led states. As NPR's Domenico Montanaro explains, they're the first major tests of voter sentiment in response to the second Trump administration's policies.
What's really important is going to be what direction is the wind blowing here politically. Both of these states, Virginia and New Jersey, were states that went for Democrat Kamala Harris in the 2024 presidential election by about 6 points. So that is sort of what the line is on these two races for the governor's races. And a lot of people are going to be watching to see just how Democrats are able to do. Are they able to kind of blow those margins out of the water? Do you have more of a mixed result? And I think that could have a lot of impact on, the shutdown negotiations, for example.
NPR's Domenico Montanaro reporting. A UPS cargo plane has crashed near the main airport in Louisville, creating a giant explosion and catching several buildings on fire. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear says at least 3 people were killed and 11 injured during the crash. UPS says 3 people were aboard the McDonnell Douglas MD-11 cargo jet. It was headed to Honolulu and packed with about 38,000 gallons of fuel. Kentucky Public Radio's Justin Hicks reports near the crash site.
Where I'm standing right now, I can see sort of black smoke rising into the air, lots and lots of lights flashing, red lights from fire trucks and blue lights from police cars. And where I'm standing is kind of as far as police are letting people go. Every now and then we hear pops of small explosions way off in the distance. Police here at the edge of the scene don't know a lot. We're just kind of holding folks back, and business owners are here kind of worried. UPS people are here leaving the UPS Worldport facility. They've been told to leave by UPS, and I don't see any planes landing at the Louisville airport right now.
Kentucky Public Radio's Justin Hicks reporting. Officials say the Louisville airport will be closed until 7 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning. Former Vice President Dick Cheney died today at age 84. Cheney's family says he died of complications of pneumonia and cardiac disease. Former President George W. Bush said Tuesday that Cheney was a decent, honorable man whose death is a loss to the nation. As a leading advocate for the invasion of Iraq, he became one of the most powerful and polarizing vice presidents in American history. He also served as defense chief during the Persian Gulf War under President George H.W. Bush. This is NPR News from Washington. Norway's sovereign wealth fund says it will vote against a package that could pay Tesla CEO Elon Musk as much as $1 trillion over a decade. The fund is one of the electric car company's biggest investors. Musk's pay package has become a contentious issue ahead of Tesla's annual meeting on Thursday. Senate Democrats say ICE is ignoring their questions about an apparent new facial recognition system. As NPR's Martin Costi says, lawmakers are following up on reports of federal agents in Chicago scanning people's faces with their phones.
The senators wrote to ICE in September demanding it stop using facial recognition in the field. Senator Edward Markey of Massachusetts says there are too many unanswered questions. For instance, does the system identify just a limited number of wanted people, or does it have access to larger databases that can identify the general public?
I don't know, and if I don't know, the Congress doesn't know, and if the Congress doesn't know, the American people don't know. This is a technology being deployed by the Trump administration against the American people.
Markey and fellow Democrats renewed their request for information on Monday. ICE has not yet replied, nor did it answer a request for comment from NPR. Martin Costi, NPR News.
Sierra, Foreigner, Lil Jon, and Kool and the Gang will star in this year's Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. The event will also spotlight K-pop Demon Hunters. The parade kicks off on November 27th, featuring 32 balloons, 27 floats, and 11 marching bands, all leading to Santa Claus. 4 new character balloons, including Buzz Lightyear and Mario, will debut. I'm Ryland Barton. You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Imaginable Futures, envisioning a future where learning sparks opportunity and thriving belongs to everyone. Learn more at imaginablefutures.com. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
Good evening and welcome to special election coverage right here on Houston Public Media News 88.7. I'm Ernie Manouse with you. Also in studio with me is Andrew Schneider, Houston Public Media's politics and government reporter. Welcome. Good evening, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
And Jeronimo Cortina, who is UH professor and host of Houston Public Media's Party Politics. Jeronimo, welcome.
Thank you.
I was going to chat with you guys a little bit, but we are very excited to have with us right out of the gate Tanisha Hudspeth. She's the Harris County clerk, and she has a very busy night ahead of her, and she's already been somewhat busy, I would say, today. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. I am not
busy. Been busy since 5 a.m. this morning.
Busy since 5 a.m. That's really getting into it. I would say, though, what's kept you busy is we have had a near record turnout for an off-year election. How are the numbers looking?
Yes, absolutely. So at the end of early voting, there were more than 212,000 voters, actually closer to 213,000 at the end of early voting. And then today, on election day, over 227,000 voters. As a matter of fact, we still had voters voting well after 7 o'clock p.m. because they were in line in time. And so we're at an average over 430,000. This definitely surpassed the 2015 odd-year election that's alike, and really, really close to 2023. I don't know that we quite met the 2023 surpassing that election and turnout, but election day really picked up.
So we know from early voting, as you said, about roughly 50% of the vote came in early voting. The numbers we're seeing that are coming out already from your office are not quite at that point yet. How soon can we expect early voting numbers to come out before we even get to today's actual vote?
Oh, early voting numbers have been out shortly since after 7 o'clock p.m. So they're up on harrisvotes.com right now. So election night is, I think, maybe what you might be mentioning in terms of how soon will election night. So those election workers have to definitely finish off their paperwork, pack up everything, and then report to one of the 5 regional collection sites that we have here in Harris County. Harris County is very large, so they'll go to the closest location to bring in their equipment and go through compliance. And then at that point, we will start to take the results and tally through the entire night to finish off those 600 election day results. And so there's really no time frame on that. As soon as the election judges get those items to us, is the sooner we can actually start processing election night results. And we'll be updating on Harris votes throughout the night. But again, early voting results are always kind of a good indicator on how the election day results will go as well.
When I was going to say, with 50% of the vote, loosely, we have a lot of understanding of what trends are and what's going to happen. Do you expect to see anything different because of the difference in the way an early voter votes compared to a day of voter?
Not necessarily. It really does depend on the type of election, but on trend for many years now, typically what you see in early voting is a clear indicator of what's going to happen by the end of election night. Now, in a presidential, just this past fall, you all might recognize that, there were some very close judicial races that flipped between 20 to hundreds of votes. And so we don't expect to see that for this particular election. And we can already see with the early voting results that there are some clear runoffs, specifically for Congressional District 18 that had 16 candidates, and City of Houston at-large position 4, which had 15 candidates. So those are early indicators of, what else will come in this evening. Will these folks continue to trend? Those two top, vote percentages trend throughout Election Day. And I think it will as the numbers come in this evening. I don't expect any wake up in the morning, surprises.
I know that in the past, Harris County has had a bit of a reputation of having some problems on Election Day, paper machines, problems like that. How was today for you?
Today was a good day. Look, one thing I have said since receiving elections back in 2023, now I've run 12 elections, is there's no such thing as a flawless election, but we work really hard around the clock to address and mitigate the issues. And so today, that first hour of voting, we got some calls in and we're able to remedy those and send out messaging fairly quickly. But always that first hour of voting, workers who, these are election day workers. So they didn't work all 12 days of early voting. So they've got one day to get it right. And in the morning, we are working around the clock, including techs in the field to address any concerns that come up. But I'm happy to say in all 12 elections that I have run, there have not been paper ballot shortages. As a matter of fact, we've had a surplus in the field. We've had a robust call center to address calls and concerns in real time. And we are already preparing for the November midterms as we speak.
Andrew, did you have a question for her?
Yes. I mean, just in terms of the what we're seeing as far as the breakdown, are there any particular patterns that we're seeing as far as I know that we have had countywide voting for several years, but are there any differences that we're seeing in terms of results from inside Houston proper as opposed to some of the outer suburbs?
So I don't have that data yet. Someone actually asked me that earlier. So now we're taking a look at it. But I will say, if you want a little bit more data, there were more women voting in this election, in those special elections, than men. Again, the average voter with higher percentage turnout was that 50 and above in terms of age range. And then it declined slowly down from there. So it is definitely the majority of the voters, over 50% of voters, are at the 50 and above age range. And women tend to really turn out a little bit over men in these special elections.
Looking at the propositions, and I don't know if this is something you can address or not, but it seems as though the majority of them are all slanting more toward in favor of the fours. Is that more natural habits of people in the way they vote, or is it because of their belief in each proposition?
I believe it's a little bit of both, right? Definitely a natural habit for proper state constitutional amendments and propositions to go for, unless there is something that sticks out. And I think there's maybe one on there. I'm not looking right at the results now. It's all on Harris votes. But it is on trend that typically with propositions, they are voted for. It all has everything to do with, money and taxpayer dollars and where this goes. So that is on trend. And then there were some propositions that I heard a lot of discussion on, particularly the proposition that had to do with the judicial system and parenting. And so we know that typically in these years, these propositions pretty much pass by pretty big numbers. When I looked at the early voting numbers, we were talking about most of them passing by 50+% of the vote, even one proposition at 80% of the vote.
Mm-hmm. Tanisha, thank you very much for being with us tonight. I know you've got a long night ahead of you to check more of these results as they come in, because if I'm doing the math right, you're only halfway done so far.
I am only halfway done. This is the next leg in the race, okay? So I changed out of my heels into tennis shoes because now we're going to assist every single election worker to get their items in so that we can feed the beast, and that is everybody who wants the numbers.
And then you got to start getting ready for runoffs. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Tanisha Hudspeth,
thank you so very much.
Thank you, is the Harris County Clerk, and she is responsible for voting on Election Day. Andrew, anything she said in there that surprises you?
Well, I suppose that one of the points that is worth reiterating is the whole issue of the differences in demographic turnout. Typically, we do wind up seeing older voters voting in larger numbers, but in this case, it looked like something close to half of the early vote totals were coming from people who were over 65. So that was kind of surprising, and also given the level of youth engagement, we would have expected a larger turnout for people under 30. There was less than something like 10% of the early voting turnout was under 30.
It's interesting. And Jeronimo, if you've looked at this, if I'm looking correctly at like Texas 18, it has a relatively young populace there when you're looking at voters. And I'm wondering, is that going to be reflected in who we see that got excited about the vote? It seems as though 50% of the population there is between 25 and 54, if I'm looking at it correctly. And so if that's the case, I would expect a younger vote pool. But as Andrew was just saying, we often expect older people to vote. So will it really reflect the will of the people in that district?
Well, I mean, as you know, elections are open, and anyone that can vote is invited to vote. And it is the accountability that we have as citizens, right? That is our right, but it is also our duty to participate in the democratic process. That's why we have a representative democracy. And the key question here is who decides to go out and vote. Obviously, is low information election. That means that it's not as popular as it would be a midterm election or a presidential election. We have very complicated constitutional amendments in the sense, or propositions in the sense that involve very important questions regarding the future of the state. And then obviously we have these Congressional District 18, in which we have a lot of people running.
Yeah. We're going to take a closer look at 18. We're going to take a closer look at the city council seat that's open. We're going to take a look at these propositions coming up. But there's also stuff going on our school board. One that's gotten a lot of attention is over in Cypress Fairbanks ISD. And the school board trustee candidates there are vying to make a change there. Houston Public Media's Bianca Seward is at the PO's Ice House in Cypress, where the candidates are hoping to win all the seats from the Board of Trustee nonpartisan slate to break up the conservative majority. Bianca, what's the mood at the watch party where you're at?
Hey guys, yeah, the mood is happy and they're overjoyed. Early numbers are showing that all three of their candidates here on the nonpartisan slate look like they're going to grab their seats. They're well ahead of all three of their opponents. So the mood is high.
So I guess then it's not much of a long shot tonight at this point from the numbers you're seeing that this could make a change.
I definitely wouldn't call it a long shot anymore. They're in the lead. This is still an early night, so we want to wait to see all the numbers, but they're definitely in good shape to take all three seats. It was definitely a tall order. They had to win all three seats to break up that majority. If any one of them didn't win their seat, that conservative majority would hold, and we're not sure how much would change.
If the conservative majority did hold, though, but two seats got in, let's say, would that still shake things up a bit?
When I talked to Leslie Gilmart earlier this evening, she said she was feeling good, and even if they weren't able to grab all three seats, she felt that chipping that majority would still send a message and that there would still be influence on the board. So yes, at least this team does believe that even one win on their team was going to make a change.
With what it feels like it might be heading toward of all three getting these seats, do you think that the race could be a referendum on conservative policies in suburban schools?
it's hard to read too much into these races because they're off-year cycles and there isn't as much turnout as we see in those midterm elections. But this is definitely an indication about public sentiment on possibly some of the policies that have been recently implemented. When I talked to voters today, that was one of the number one things driving them to the polls. They could name the various conservative policies that had been implemented that they weren't happy with. Voters across the political spectrum, whether you like them or not, that was what was driving them to the polls. So absolutely, we don't want to overread into this, but we can definitely glean some of the public sentiment was unhappy or these policies were unpopular.
Yeah. I'm gathering that there's some good news coming their way from the cheers we're hearing over there.
There are definitely some early celebrations here, early speeches. So yeah, people are having a good time.
I heard that you had a bit of an interview you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, I did. I spoke to one of the voters earlier, and this is what we were talking about, those policies that have tonight maybe proven unpopular. I spoke to a voter named Julia Figueroa, and she explains to me that she doesn't have kids in the school district. This race still matters to her. Let's take a listen.
I've been very concerned about the right-wing takeover of the school board here in Cy-Fair Independent School District in which I live. I am an older voter and I don't have children. I've never had children, but I pay taxes. I pay school taxes. So it's important to me that children have access to bias-free education.
And that's the exact sentiment that this nonpartisan slate was hoping would drive their voters, their supporters to the polls. So I think that they're pretty happy with what they're seeing on the early results right now.
Do you think Ms. Figueroa represents the community pretty broadly, or is it a pretty narrow view?
I think it's definitely very split here in Cyprus. I talked to another woman today, Scarlett McGeorge, who felt that those conservative values were exactly what she wanted to see in her school board. She called Natalie Blasinian one of the most conservative people on the school board, or formerly on the school board, her girl. She was very proud of the policies that Blasinian brought forward and wanted to see more of those. She has a grandson in private school, wants to put him in the public schools here, but wouldn't unless the conservative majority held. So I would say the sentiment isn't widespread either way. It's just a big talker right now. People are debating these policies and seeing how they want to move forward.
Before I let you go, I know you're over in Cy-Fair, but I'm curious, how are the elections going for Board of Trustees for Houston ISD? Do you know what's going on there?
Yeah, it's an interesting election over there in HISD since that's a non-active trustees. Those trustees full power for board seats until the takeover is over in June 2027, or that's when it's scheduled to end. But we are seeing Maria Benzone, looks like she's leading against Robbie McDonough. Michael McDonough looks like he's leading in his race. The one that looks tight is over in District 7, and that's Bridget Wade is the incumbent running against Audrey Naff. I've spoken with both of those candidates in that race, and they're both still claiming that these are early results and that it'll be a late night. So they are watching and refreshing and not making any statements ahead of all the results.
Well, I know you'll continue and watch for us. Bianca, thank you very much, and don't have too much fun at that ice house.
Thanks, guys.
Houston Public Media's Bianca Seward is at PO's Ice House in Cyprus, and she's with the nonpartisan slate of Cypress Fair ISD's school board trustee candidates. So we thank her for that. Jeronimo, thoughts on anything on school board issues and how they are voting, especially over in Cyprus or Cy-Fair?
Well, I think when we look at school boards, school elections became a couple of years ago the new battleground to fight these culture wars. So I think it's very interesting to see how, on the one hand, turnout and the differences that exist in voters are now being materialized in what would be these very, very localized elections. Why? Because school boards really have a say in terms of how policy and eventually very important decisions to educate children. So the point here, I think, is that now we're seeing this pendulum going back to the other side. And remember, we have seen, for example, we saw in 2020 a move of the country, and especially other local elections, swinging to the left a little bit, more progressive. more focus on a number of social issues. And then we started to see in 2024 and the years in between a swing back to the right. So eventually this swing hopefully is going to bring us back to the middle where things perhaps should be in order to have more policy discussions.
One thing that might be an indicator of that is one of the amendments that's on the ballot today about who has the right to educate our children. I guess I'm paraphrasing it. We'll get to that a little bit later in the show. But right now I want to move us a little closer to home and get back into the city of Houston and take a look at the at-large city council race. So I'm curious, Andrew, I'm going to turn this towards you. What's at stake here with a single city council seat?
Well, when you're dealing with the Houston City Council, the big issue that's on the agenda for everybody on the council is the city's budget. The city's facing a deficit of $128 million. The city council and Mayor John Whitmire have been divided on how to handle it, particularly on the issue of whether to raise taxes. And in that frame, any potential shift in the council can make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Jeronimo, tell me this then. In some ways, because some of the candidates have been strongly opposed to the mayor, some have been very in favor of the mayor, can you look at a race like this as, in some ways, a slight referendum on how the mayor is doing and how the public is reacting to it?
Well, it would be difficult to give that interpretation. The mayor is being, quite a few months on the job, but not necessarily enough time to make these huge differences and polarize the electorate one way or the other. And also we have to remember it's also a race in which we have a lot of people running for this position, and we're going to have obviously a runoff election for city council member. These are large position number 4. But I want to reiterate what Andrew is saying is we have a structure in the city government in which city council plays a very important role. So whoever wins this election will have to play not only the policy card, but also the politics card in order to see which side is going to go, whether siding with the mayor in terms of how the mayor sees the city moving forward and how city council sees the city moving forward.
Let's check in with our City Hall reporter, Dominic Anthony Walsh, who is covering this special election. He is in with the candidate Alejandro Salinas' campaign. He's at their watch party right now. Dominic, what's the mood like there?
The mood is good. Alejandro Salinas and Dwight Boykins are at the top right now. And so Salinas is happy. I chatted with her earlier, and her supporters are enthusiastic. She's a newcomer to city politics, but quickly became a heavy hitter in this race. She raised more than $500,000 in donations, had the backing of multiple powerhouse labor unions. Some of the members of the unions are here. They're excited about these results. And she's running a campaign focused on, improving delivery of government services like public safety, solid waste collection, which you typically hear from all the candidates, but also more general liberal ideas like equity and defending democracy. Folks here are excited about that.
You've mentioned Dwight Boykins. You're at Salinas' campaign. There's a third candidate out of the, I guess it's 16 in the race. Maybe I also heard 15. How many? 15 in the race. Jordan Thomas. And what do we know about, is he still considered a long shot, or does he have a shot at this?
So Jordan Thomas, last results I saw was in a strong position in third, but Boykins and Salinas were definitely in front and a lot closer to one another. Thomas has been considered a long shot. He's a progressive urbanist who wants to see a transformation of the city's built environment, and he's positioned himself as a potential voice on the city council against Mayor John Whitmire. Now, that did earn him the endorsement of the Houston Chronicle, his only notable endorsement, but a significant one. Thomas is a former city council chief of staff, so he has city hall experience, but little name recognition, unlike Dwight Boykins, little fundraising, unlike Alejandro Salinas. So he faced challenges in uphill battle. He fired up a base of progressive urbanists who backed that vision of a transformation of the city's built environment. But as of right now, with the results that we have, Salinas and Boykins are very much in the lead.
Yeah, unfortunately, in the way this structure is, it doesn't matter if you come in third. It's the first two that move on to the runoff. So that's what you're vying for, first or second place. When you do have a city council that has 15 other council members and a strong mayor system, how much power does a council member actually have?
It's a great question, and it's actually relatively timely because Prop A approved just 2 years ago during a busier off-year election like this, when the mayor and the city council was on the ballot. Prop A gave more power to the council members. It made it so that 3 council members could add items to the city council's agenda. That was a power previously reserved only for the mayor. So that makes any one council member more powerful if they can get 2 others to sign on to their item. I talked with Fred Woods. He was one of the organizers behind Proposition A. He's here at the watch party. He says council can't just use this as a cudgel against the mayor, as some have called for it to be. They still need to collaborate to get majority support, 9 votes for their positions.
It's still a strong mayor form of government. And the mayor has direct influence on all of the letter district council members. You don't find your way to 9 with going against the mayor. You have to work with him.
And he thinks Salinas is best positioned to do that.
It'll be interesting to watch. This race will likely, as we've already been saying, head into a runoff. It seems very unlikely someone would get 50% plus 1. What can voters expect in the days and weeks ahead?
So the runoff election is slated for Saturday, December 13th. It's likely to have even lower turnout, according to analysts, which they say makes fundraising even more important. When we look at the fundraising, Salinas held $193,000 in her campaign coffers, according to her report at the end of October, whereas Boykins maintained about $32,000. So quite a disparity in fundraising, though like we've mentioned, Boykins has the benefit of name recognition as a former city council member. Salinas is also well positioned with powerful endorsements and a lot of money. So we'll see how the next month and a half go before this runoff.
Well, Dominic, thank you for this. Keep watching, and if anything changes, let us know. That's our City Hall reporter, Dominic Anthony Walsh, and he is with the Salinas campaign. Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you, Ernie.
It seems like an interesting thing to have a city council, an at-large position. And Jeronimo, if you can explain exactly why do we have this one seat open right now? Because that's an interesting story, too.
Well, it's because we have candidates running on another race. And obviously, Texas law says that if you're going to run for another position, you have to quit, as you would expect your current position. So that's why we have an opening. And what Dominic just mentioned is extremely important in terms of how now the politics of city council become more political in terms of having a balance of power, quote unquote, between council members that are also elected and the mayor. So it's going to be very interesting at the end how they collaborate in order to move the city forward.
Andrew, let me ask this question. Right now, is it city council against the mayor, or are there 2 factions in city council that battle between themselves toward what the mayor is doing? How are we structured right now at city council?
I think it's more the latter. I think we definitely see some council members that line up with the mayor. It's part of the strengths of a strong mayor system is the ability to build coalitions like this. It's one of the reasons why the mayor has been as successful as he has in getting much of his agenda passed.
So if you see Salinas and Boykins in a runoff, how do you think it's going to go?
I think it really is going to depend on the campaign finance at this point. As Jeronimo was saying, if we're looking at a low turnout election, and you've got just a few weeks in order to get people focused, to get people to turn out, you've got to make the best use of what funds you have left after the first round. And Salinas definitely has an advantage there.
It'll be interesting to watch and see how that plays off and what that'll mean for our city moving forward in a moment like this. Also, I don't think it can tell you much at this point about political leanings in our city, does it?
No, it's very difficult to do that in terms of a city council race, simply because citywide races are effectively nonpartisan.
Yeah. Well, that is just one of the races we are watching. We are also watching the congressional special election that is going on. And it's a fascinating one because it's been left vacant for a good amount of time. Andrew, tell me a little bit about it before we go into a report that you've done.
Sure. This seat has been vacant for much of the past 16 months. It started off with the late Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who'd held the office for close to 30 years before she died while she was running for re-election in 2024. That was vacant for 4 months before there was a special election where her daughter, Erica Lee Carter, was elected to fill out her term, and then former Houston City Mayor Sylvester Turner was elected to a new term. He lasted for about 2 months before he passed away in March. And then Governor Abbott waited a month before deciding that he was going to hold a special election in November. As you were talking before, he was raising concerns about Harris County's ability to conduct a clean, fair, untroubled election. But this was, as Jeronimo was talking about, against the backdrop of Republican control of Congress with a very narrow majority, and most analysts have been saying that the governor's motivation for putting this off as long as he did was to try and hold on to that slim lead.
Yeah, well, you had a chance to sit down, because it's a fascinating district, too, the history behind it. And you had a chance to sit down with TSU Public Affairs Professor Michael Adams to take a closer look at this historic district.
What should people who live outside the 18th Congressional District know about the history of the district and its significance?
This district is very significant, and I like to call it a legacy district, where it has had a African-American member of Congress for more than 53 years. And the first person elected was Barbara Jordan, and she also became the first woman from the Deep South to be elected to Congress. And she was followed by the late Mickey Leland, who passed away on a humanitarian mission to Ethiopia. And after that, we had Craig Washington, who served, I think, 3 terms. And after Craig was elected, when he left, the seat was held by Sheila Jackson Lee for 30 years in terms of that seat. And then Sheila Jackson Lee, unfortunately and tragically, she passed away. And then we had the former mayor of Houston, Sylvester Turner. He was elected, and Sylvester Turner also had an untimely death in terms of passing away. And so it's an interesting district, but it's a district that has been represented by an African American since the day that it was created, and that has been more than 53 years ago.
The 18th Congressional District was front and center in the redistricting fight over the summer in the legislature during the special sessions. How has that affected what we're seeing leading up to tonight's election?
If you look at what happened or what transpired, President Trump, through his Justice Department, indicated that there was something known as coalition districts. And one of the federal court cases, coalition districts were deemed to be unconstitutional based upon the whole concept of racial gerrymandering. There was a letter sent to Governor Abbott where the charge was given. They looked at 3 districts in particular. The 18th Congressional District, one of those. The other district in the Houston area as well is District 29, represented by Sylvia Garcia, and the other one is the 33rd Congressional District in Texas. So those districts were singled out because they have what we call coalitions in terms of the majority makeup of those districts, in particular 18 and the 29th Congressional District.
If this contest goes to a second round, how will that work?
I think it's almost a certainty, given the 16 candidates that are in the field, that no candidate will receive 50% plus 1, which is majority of the vote. And then we would have what we call a runoff. And the runoff could be scheduled from January as early as February, all right? Because there are certain legal regulations and requirements that impact the canvassing of the votes. And one is the MOVE Act, which stands for the Military Overseas Voter Empowerment Act. There has to be a 45-day window after the election in order to receive the ballots from overseas and make sure that they are counted.
The 18th overlaps a good portion of the Houston area, but as we've been discussing, they are not the only district in the Houston area. Why should people outside the 18th care about what happens in the 18th?
I think the midterm redistricting cycle in an 18th congressional district, what has happened in terms of state politics and redistricting, it has come to be somewhat of the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, because we could be confronted with redistricting or these partisan whenever a Congress decides or the presidents decide whether or not they want to increase the representation of their party, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. Let's talk about what has happened. Immediately after Governor Abbott decided to call the legislature into special session and put on the item, one of the items was redistricting. We saw Gavin Newsom in California. And so, again, I think what we see here, it impacts minority representation also in terms of fairness. And Barbara Jordan would always say she just wants her country to do what's right and what's best for the country.
That's a portion of Andrew Schneider's in-depth report on the Texas 18th Congressional District with TSU's Michael Adams. If you want to hear that full interview, you can pull it from today's episode of Hello Houston, both available as a podcast or on our YouTube channel. Just look for November 4th's Hello Houston, and the full story is there. Looking at the 18th, it is fascinating what's happening there, and 16 people in the running for that one. I got the number right this time.
Yes.
So, Andrew, tell me this. With 16 people running, you got to know, unless you've got a lot of traction at the top of the field, you're not going to get a lot of traction. Are a lot of these candidates in there because of all that's going to happen with redistricting in the next few months, potentially, and they're trying to get their names out there and start showing themselves as candidates?
I think that's part of it, but I mean, you have to remember that a lot of these people got into this race before redistricting became an issue. And I think the bigger explanation as to why there are so many people in this race is that, as we said before, there's the possibility of a generational shift. You know, Sheila Jackson Lee held the post for almost 30 years. Sylvester Turner, when he was running for it, basically said that he was going to be a transitional figure to a new generation. There's the possibility that whoever winds up winning this seat, assuming that the district stays within its current boundaries and it's not redrawn according to the redistricting of this past summer, could wind up holding this seat for decades. If the boundaries are in fact redrawn, and this is something that we're still waiting for the results of the federal district court in El Paso to decide, then there's a real possibility that a sitting member of Congress whose home and much of whose base has been moved from his current seat into the 18th will wind up challenging in the primary next year. And that's Congressman Al Green, currently in the 9th Congressional District. He has said that he would not be a candidate in the 9th, but that he would be on the ballot in 2026. And there's really only one place for him to go in that case, and that would be to run in the 18th. If he does, he is likely to have a very strong base of support in his new district.
That'll be fascinating to watch when that comes out. And that'll be already in March.
That will be in March.
Even if this seat isn't seated until February.
Correct.
Wow. Jeronimo, earlier on, before we saw how strong the numbers were for early voting, we always expect these off-cycle elections to be lower numbers of folks. So with having so many people in the race, a handful of votes can shift who makes the top two.
Oh, absolutely. This is why in this type of elections, every single vote matters. Mm-hmm. As the night advances, we're going to see election day votes. And remember that the county clerk just told us a few moments ago that it's basically 50-50. So we're expecting another 200,000 votes coming in. Yes, most likely the same tendency and the same shape of votes right now are going to continue. but perhaps you can see that some voters move, or some candidates move from second to third, from third to second, so on and so forth, and especially given the number of candidates that you have. So right now, everything could be possible, but these numbers are so far pretty indicative in this case that Menifee, we have Edwards, and also Jones are the three top spots. How that's going to shape at the end, we don't know, but most likely these numbers are going to hold.
So let me just quickly point out to everyone, Menifee currently at this point with just over 50%, we assume, of the vote reporting. He's at about 32.5%. Jolanda Jones is at about 19%, and Amanda Edwards is at about 25%, slightly rounded, but we're on the radio, so I'll make it easy for you to follow. And those are our top three at this point. We understand that Amanda Edwards is going to be speaking momentarily, and we're monitoring that for you as well. So we are going to quickly go over to Natalie Weber. Natalie Weber is with the Amanda Edwards campaign, who is also, as we've mentioned, in the 19th congressional race. So, Natalie, what are you seeing there at the party right now?
Yes, so Amanda Edwards is about to start speaking. I am standing from the back of the crowd, so I don't interrupt. She's being introduced right now. But as you mentioned, she is one of the leading candidates in this race with about 25% of the early vote. So she is someone to watch tonight.
Another question we have her, with 16 candidates running for this seat, do you think that there could be an upset with somebody else when the rest of these votes come in?
You know, I think it's hard to say. We're keeping an eye on things, but recent polling as well as campaign finance has showed Christian Menifee and Amanda Edwards in the lead, both in terms of how much they've raised and the expected vote.
I'm getting a feeling she's just getting up to speak right now with that noise.
Yes. She introduction speech is still going, but she should be up shortly.
Okay. While we're waiting for that, you did have an opportunity to speak with voters today in the 18th Congressional District. What did you hear from them?
Right. So voters really emphasize the importance of representation. Like Andrew was saying earlier, this is a district that hasn't had a representative for a good part of the last 16 months. And it could be longer if tonight's race goes into a runoff, which it likely will. I talked to Walter Mallett, who was voting at the Kashmir Multi-Service Center on Houston's North Side earlier today. And he said a lack of representation for the 18th Congressional District has hurt his community.
I've seen a lot of growth. I'm seeing more growth. I'm seeing more people come in, and I'm seeing more people getting pushed out because we don't have the proper representation that we need to secure our own property and our own land here in this area.
So when I spoke with Mallett this afternoon, the voting site was fairly quiet. However, when I went to the Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church around 5:30 p.m., it was a lot busier, and that's probably just because people were finished with work. But
What are some of the main takeaways that you see in the Amanda Edwards platform? And I bring that up because she's run for a number of offices now and has often been a bridesmaid and not a bride, but here she is gaining traction in this race.
Yeah, so Amanda Edwards has really positioned herself as the best person to take on President Donald Trump's policies. She's focused on things like healthcare and cuts to other federal programs under the Trump administration. And she's also touched some on public safety and infrastructure.
Well, Natalie, I thank you for being there. I know she's just about to speak. We're going to monitor that from here and try and bring it to our audience live as it happens. But thank you very much, Natalie, for sharing with us.
Alrighty, thank you, Ernie.
That's Houston Public Media's Natalie Weber at the Edwards Watch Party in Midtown. Andrew, thoughts on what's happening in the 18th at this point? No real surprise that these two would be heading, Menifee and Edwards, toward the runoff?
No, the real question was how much of a share of the vote that they would gather. Most polling up until now has shown Menifee and Edwards running pretty close, both in terms of polling and in terms of their financial support. Both of them had raised well over $1 million. Both of them have well north of $300,000 left on hand. So if it does wind up going to a runoff between the two of them, they'll both be well positioned to fight this out well into the next year.
Well, I just mentioned Christian Menefee, so why don't we go visit with Michael Adkisson? He's Houston Public Media's reporter who is at the Christian Menefee watch party. So, Michael, what's happening there? I'm assuming they're in a good spirit tonight.
Good evening. That's exactly the case here. We actually heard Christian Menefee speak about 20 minutes ago, essentially claiming as much of a victory as he can this evening, as we alluded to. This race is almost certainly going to go into a runoff between him and Edwards. Currently, the two front runners in this race. Christian Menefee spoke and said that he was the one that he is ready to handle the runoff. He went as far as to say that he is ready to handle a primary when that comes, because again, this is a special election. This is not the routine congressional election. And he said that he is ready to carry this fight on as long as he needs. People are excited. The people here have been just really supportive. And we're here at the spot in East Downtown. It's a Black-owned business. So it's something that Christian Menefee noted into saying that he really wanted to carry on the legacy of his predecessors who are going to be in this congressional seat. As you kind of heard Andrew speaking about earlier, that this is a storied congressional seat.
You know what, Michael, we're having a little trouble with your audio right now. I'm going to let them have a moment to try and check on that and see if we can reconnect with you and get a better sound. So do your magic at your end, and we're going to chat here in the studio. Jeronimo, I guess part of my thought process, looking at all the numbers as they come in. So Christian Menefee has what we said about 32.5% of the vote. That means there's a huge chunk of the vote he doesn't have. Does that bode well for the person running in the runoff against him simply because he was such a high-profile candidate? If you weren't already jumping on the train then and you were going to one of the other candidates, does that mean there could be a groundswell for another candidate to usurp him in the runoff? Or because he's doing such a strong showing here, he has the wind in his sails, as they say?
Well, yeah, you have 16 candidates. And when you look at the numbers, you have candidates that got, between 2,500 votes to 106 or 181.
I see someone with 53 votes.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it goes very low.
So it goes low. But those 53 votes eventually are going to count. Because as we know, the runoff elections, middle of December, very, very, very low turnout. And as Andrew said, the amount of money and the number of doors that you can go and get people out to vote are going to be extremely important. And also the type of, if some of these candidates that did not win this election or went to the runoff election, if they're going to be willing to basically support one or the other candidates. And that will give them a certain number of voters or support at least to go for the runoff. So a lot of moving pieces right now, but funding is going to be extremely important. And the second one is also going to be how they present themselves in the runoff election and why should voters, the very small number of voters that are going to decide this election, are going to vote for one or the other.
Andrew, two things here. One, that we keep talking about the runoffs, assuming everyone understands why we're talking about runoffs. But for both of these races that we're watching tonight, the Texas 18th and the city council at large, you need 50% plus one to win in the election today, correct?
Correct. Under Texas state law, you need to have a clear majority, which means one vote more than 50%, in order to be able to win outright in the first round. If you don't, then the top two vote getters go to a second round. The rules governing that depend on whether we're talking about a state or local race or whether we're talking about a federal race.
And so this complicates things more for me. You already have a lower number of turnouts for an off-cycle election like this one. Then you have a lower number of turnouts when it becomes what was the word?
Runoff.
Runoff. Thank you. The word escaped me at that moment. In this case now, your runoffs aren't both going to happen on the same day. So it's not even like you have a de facto election day. You're going to have one runoff for the city council, probably December 13th or something like that. They're already talking. But the one for the Texas 18th isn't going to happen for 70-some days. It's got to be in January.
In January, right.
So that's going to dilute the election pool even more. How do you get voters out there? How do you get voters informed that you're even running again?
Well, that's where the money comes in.
Okay.
One other point that I think it's worth raising. There is no party. There was no primary going into the special election. You could run in this election regardless of whether you were a Democrat, Republican, or Independent. And while this is a historically Democratic district, there are several Republican candidates in the contest, some of whom have racked up well over 1,000 votes. Those votes would be important. The question is whether any of those voters are going to be willing to, A, show up again, and B, if they do, cross over the aisle to support one of the likely Democratic candidates in the runoff. That's by no means a given thing.
Yeah. And if you're wondering why words keep escaping Andrew and me, we have been at this since early this morning, and we're still going strong. And do you think either of us are going to bed early tonight? Nope. We're going to stay up and watch this till the end. But you don't have to stay with us that long because we won't be on air till the end. Let's go back to Michael Atkinson. I think we've got him reconnected with us. Michael, can you hear me?
Hey, yes, I can.
And
hopefully you guys can hear me now.
We can hear you much, much better now. I'm going to regroup a question that I asked before, and then I want to move on to a couple of fresh questions. But we all are pretty much looking at Menifee in the lead at this point. It looks like with the results that are coming in, he's probably going toward the runoff. So what does it mean for his chances of actually becoming a next member of Congress when you look at the way the votes are coming in today?
You exactly hit it on the nose, Ernie, which is the fact that this more than likely is going to go to a runoff that, as we've alluded to throughout this whole special, it's going to take 50% plus one for anyone to come out on top and not need a runoff. And with 16 candidates, that's all but impossible. Christian Menifee seemed to have embraced that idea and that mentality. In his speech this evening, said that he's basically ready for another race, i.e. that runoff that's going to happen, likely between him and Amanda Edwards as the current numbers continue to hold. And he said that he's prepared to handle that and that he's even ready to go on into the primary next year, given that this is just a special election. This is not the routine congressional election that we expect every 2 years. But he says that he's ready to take on this challenge and take this fight over to the White House, he says.
Another thing is that to win a race like this, especially in a year like this, you got to get out and hit the road. Menifee's been doing an awful lot of campaigning for the last couple of weeks.
That's exactly right. He has been hitting the block, essentially, has been one of the main strategies that he's taken. And with that, he's really brought some big names with him. Jasmine Crockett, a congresswoman from the Dallas area, is probably the biggest name that he's brought along with him, who went door to door with Christian Menifee just a couple of weeks ago, right around the time that No Kings protest happened. Jasmine Crockett has a huge base among Democratic voters, and we really saw that mirrored in Christian Menifee. And as soon as he mentioned Jasmine Crockett's name tonight, there was a huge roar from the crowd. But even today, he's almost been coasting along, knowing that he is leading the polls and even currently leading the early election results. He only had a couple of appearances at polls today, whereas Amanda Edwards, his closest competitor, made nearly a dozen stops at different polls. Christian Menifee only had a couple before coming to tonight's election watch party.
For the Texas 18th, this is a really important race. They've been without representation on the national level since March, and it's going to be a while more, even with the election today, before they have representation. You've had a chance to speak to some voters out there. How do they feel about not knowing who's going to be representing them for at least another 2 more months?
Well, Ernie, it's not even just a today thing. We've been hearing this for months and months now. Essentially, these constituents here in District 18 not having a voice in Congress. And, you know, that may not sound like much, but essentially we're talking about what our country is based off of in democracy, that these people are supposed to have a representative in Congress. And now for, 8 months now, they have not had that representative. And that could even stretch even further. We don't know exactly when this runoff is going to be at this point. It's likely going to be early next year, but there's no set date. And even then, there's not a set idea of exactly when that congressperson-elect is going to be sworn into office. So these constituents in District 18, we've been hearing for months now, and even up to today, say that they're frustrated and that they wish they had more representation in Congress.
Well, they're on the path now, at least, to getting someone. The question becomes who it will be, when their runoff will be, and when they will be sworn in. So, Michael Atkinson, thank you for following this with us and being at the Christian Menifee party.
Thank y'all.
That is Houston Public Media's Michael Atkinson. So it is interesting that even once they get elected, do we expect that they will be sworn in right away?
Well, that's a $64,000 question. Why? Because Adelita Grijalva, that won a special election, given that her dad just passed away, former Congressman Grijalva, and she has not been sworn in. So that is also a matter of you have a representative elect, but that representative elect cannot take part on the business of the House. So we just have to wait and see if he or she is going to be sworn in once that special election and the runoff happens.
As exciting as always the campaigns of individuals running to take a seat are, what is also significantly important are the propositions that are on there, the amendments to our Texas state constitution that are at play. And I'm curious, when you look at the ballot measures that are out there, which ones are the most impactful? And I'll start with you, Andrew, on this. Do you get the feeling that the voters really know what they're voting for?
Well, it depends. I mean, there are 17 propositions on the ballot, or were 17 propositions on the ballot. More than half of them dealt with taxes. And if there's one thing that can be said with a surety about Texas voters, they like to keep their taxes low. So I would say that probably the most impactful items on the agenda there would be Propositions 13 and 11. Proposition 13 would lift the base of the homestead exemption for all property owners from $100,000 to $140,000. That's the portion of the home's value that can be used to determine their tax bill. For Proposition 11, that provides an additional exemption for those over 65 or disabled homeowners, lifting that from a current exemption of $10,000 to $60,000. So if both were to pass and you were over 65 or disabled and a homeowner, you could have a homestead exemption of $200,000. Some of the other items on the agenda that are fairly significant, Proposition 3 would make it mandatory for judges to deny bail to people who are accused of certain violent or sexual felonies. We were talking about Proposition 12 earlier that would give the governor a much stronger hand in disciplining or removing elected judges. That's currently the decision of a mix of judges and attorneys in addition to those appointed by the governor. And Proposition 14, which would create a new prevention and research institute for combating dementia, in line with an existing institute that Texas already has to combat cancer, that would allocate $3 billion from the state coffers.
Before we discuss any of that further, I have to tell you that this is your NPR station, KUHF Houston, News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston. To stick with the amendment conversation, Jeronimo, help me with this. I was talking with someone and they said to me, really, you should vote no for all of them because none of these need to be amendments to the Constitution. They need to be laws that are passed. They need to be done by legislature. They need to be decided as the problems arise and can be adjusted as the problems need adjusting. By making them amendments, it makes it shouldn't be put into the Constitution. Thoughts on that and understanding that theory?
Well, I mean, yes and no. There are some of the propositions that I think should be there in the Constitution so no one can mess around with them. And just to give you an example, Proposition Fund, the Water Fund, that's $1 billion in annual funding for water supplies, wastewater, and flooding projects. So you want that thing to be on the Constitution, that anyone that attempts to move it cannot remove it and has to be a constitutional mandate. Why? Because water is such a big resource and such a scarce resource that we are entering an era in which it's becoming more and more and more and more scarce, and water wars are coming. So we better be prepared in terms of how to think creatively from a public policy perspective to save this wonderful resource that is, if we don't have it, we don't live. As simple as that. Other ones, I agree, right? For example, Proposition 12, I think it's a proposition that It's entangling the separation of powers that we have in the Texas Constitution and allowing the governor or the executive branch to have a say on an independent branch of government. Mm-hmm. And this is why we have elections. This is why we elect our judges. So our judges are going to be completely independent and chosen by the people in order to do the business of the judiciary and not having the executive branch have a say on how judges are going to be disciplined or not.
But I go back to what we were talking to at the beginning of the hour, is that it looks as though most people just vote for them and don't really fully understand what they mean. And there's one, Proposition 15, that stands out to me, which says the constitutional amendment affirming that parents are the primary decision makers for their children. That's the entire text of it that people are voting on. And
right.
To anyone, that would be like, of course parents should decide what to do for their children. But it actually has other implications that people may not be aware of when voting for it. So either one of you that wants to take that one for me and talk a little deeper into it.
Well, I think it's extremely controversial, right? It's extremely controversial because, yes, at face value is, yes.
Right. It wouldn't seem controversial to read this line.
100%, right? However, it is controversial in the sense that, for example, you have other type of policies in which the government wants to decide on behalf of parents. And then is whether, wait a minute, are we going for parents should decide whatever they want to do with their children, or now you're going to get involved? So does this has to be a proposition that has to be written in the Constitution? Well, I don't think so. I mean, there's parents already, we have case law, we have statutes, we have a very generous education code that gives parents a bill of rights in terms to decide, yes, no, my kid can go to this activity or not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't understand why it has to be codifying the Constitution that we, the parents, have the right to upbring our children.
Yeah, I think it's also worth remembering that the argument that parents should be the primary source of decision making in terms of their child has been used to justify a whole range of educational laws that passed during the recent regular legislative session. Mm-hmm. So the question then becomes, all right, this is a relatively straightforward amendment and there's a relatively few number of words, but what is it actually being used to justify?
Well, I will say that at this point, with about 53% reporting in the vote, it is definitely going to pass with practically 71% of the vote in favor of it. But I do wonder how many people really know the nuance of what they're voting for. Before we run out of time tonight, and as we continue to wait for more results to come in, and you'll be able to follow that on HoustonPublicMedia.org, there are some national races that are catching a lot of attention. I was going to talk about more of them than I have time for now. The couple that I'm interested in is, Andrew, help me with this one first. It's the mayor's race in New York City, a very controversial Democrat, very controversial by those who don't like him. And for those who like him, he is the savior in the future of the Democratic Party, and that's Zoran Mamdani. He looks like he is definitely going to win. Is that a comment on the direction of the Democratic Party moving forward, or is this an isolated event like New York is a very unique city?
I think it needs to be taken in conjunction with the results that we're waiting for. That we're seeing, I should say, out of Virginia in the governor's race there and out of New Jersey in the governor's race there. In both cases, we're looking at Democratic candidates that are well closer to the center than Mamdani is. Mm-hmm. So I think it can be read any number of different ways. Certainly, Mamdani picked up significant support from progressive elements within the party, not to mention former President Barack Obama, who came out and said that he was willing to be a sounding board for Mamdani, and on the opposite end of things, President Trump weighed in the race in a very last-minute endorsement of former Governor Cuomo.
And then Governor Cuomo tried very delicately to back away from that endorsement. Right. But on the other hand, he embraces it because he needs everyone that doesn't want Mamdani to get the vote. And so they talk about if the Republican were out of the race, Silwa, that he could carry it, that Cuomo could have carried it if it was just a two-person vote. You're not agreeing with me on that one, Jeronimo.
No, the gap between Mandami and Cuomo is around 50% versus 41%, and Silva got around 7% of the vote. So even though if those voters would have voted for Cuomo, he would have gotten 48. So still.
But how much is in now? The polls just closed in New York.
Sure. It's around 88% of the votes. I think NPR already gave it to Mandami. You're talking about, yes, close, but not necessarily too close. But I think the question that you asked, Ernie, is extremely important. And I think Democrats won both races, both the Virginia governor's race and also the New Jersey governor's race, and then obviously New York City mayoral race. So this indicates, the temperature of the country. And the temperature of the country is saying one way or the other, whether we like Mandami or we don't like Mandani. The rest of the electorate, at least in the East Coast, is saying, you know what? Yes, this is perhaps the prelude act number one in terms of what we can expect during the midterm election, especially if the economy doesn't turn around in terms of inflation and consumer prices.
An argument can be made, though, that New Jersey is pretty much Democratic. It's very Democratic to a lot of the way, and that it's a conservative Democrat, Shiro is. When you go over to Virginia, once again, Spanberger, somewhat centrist Democrat, too. So neither of them are cut from the same cloth as Mamdani.
Sure.
So is it giving us anything that we can really hang a hat on at this point about understanding the way the nation is viewing the Democratic Party at this point?
I think the one takeaway is that in all three cases, it's potentially could be read as a rejection of President Trump's policies, at least in those portions of the country. In each of those cases, Trump weighed in. Trump made his preferences known. The voters went in the other direction.
That's an interesting point, too.
Yeah.
Speaking of the voters going in the opposite direction, fascinating that we are influencing California politics here in Texas, but because of what's happening with redistricting in Texas, as everyone knows, California had Prop 50 out there on the ballot, which is the proposition to allow the state to move away from their nonpartisan districting board and letting the government decide the districts so that they can redistrict to favor Democrats in California. Do we know how that's going? Early numbers are saying it looks like it's going to pass.
Yeah, the latest polls suggest that voters were going to support these Proposition 50 regarding congressional redistricting. Obviously, the polls have not, we don't have yet any data coming from California. But if it happens, then once again, it is this redistricting battle royale that we're seeing across the country in order to try to balance what's going to happen in terms of the midterm election. And again, it's trying to have a nuclear option against another nuclear option that started with redistricting here in Texas.
Yeah. Andrew, do you worry this kind of behavior, there's not going to be a cap on it? That this, once we start doing this all over, that it's constantly going to be in flux, and whoever controls the state house is going to be changing the borders over and over again.
That is a very real concern, and it's one that I came across back during the summer when I was reporting on the redistricting fight during the first and second special sessions. We're seeing it not just here and in California. We're seeing it, it's been raised in Indiana and Missouri and Ohio and Maryland and Florida. And there's a very real prospect that when all of the chips have finished falling, it could wind up being a wash. But as you said, there's the prospect of a never-ending series of readjustments of the congressional borders that have nothing to do with the average 10-year census in order to set the boundaries. So we could be in for an endless array of these things unless there's some sort of measures taken at the federal level to specifically say, no, you only have redistricting once every 10 years.
Do you think there's an appetite to pass a bill like that?
No. Well, I mean, there is Democrats and Republicans do not have the incentives to do so, right? Because, as Andrew said, once the genie's out of the bottle, it's very hard to put it back in. And if I have in control of a state legislature, hey, what am I going to do?
Let me put another perspective on that and take it back closer to home. So we were talking about in Texas, and we had, of course, during the summer, we had the walkout of the Democrats from Austin. One of the Democrats who walked out was Yolanda Jones and was quite vocal about, we're not putting up with this. We're going to stay out until we can work with the House, the state House. And she even stayed out longer than other members did after they came back. It doesn't seem to have done, I think, what maybe some thought it would do, is skyrocket these Democrats to a more sense of leadership, that they fought for us in the trenches in this very difficult moment. Because if it did, wouldn't that have lifted Yolanda maybe in her Texas 18th run?
Well, I would say that she wasn't the only member of the state house that was involved with that.
But I think she's the only one running in the 18th.
This is true, but one of the other ones that was significant was James Tallarico, who was used as an opportunity to launch his run for the Senate. And we're looking ahead towards the next election. But he made himself a statewide figure in part through his stance on the redistricting fight.
So, Jeronimo, your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean,
I'm just holding on to it because I want to believe my theory is right. I'm going to wait till I find someone who agrees.
I mean, I think it's complicated because, once again, it's a very odd election that we have. We have 16 candidates. Money played a very important role. And perhaps you may have that projection in terms of state level or statewide public, or people are more informed in terms of the news. But once you translate it to a local race, a special election in the Congressional District 18, maybe you don't have enough impact, and it's going to depend on how attuned voters are in terms of what happened and what transpired with Democrats leaving the session.
As we continue to wait for more numbers to come out, Andrew, let me ask you this. Looking across the country and from the few races we're looking at from here, it looks like Democrats are having a good night. In our Texas 18th, it's going to be a Democrat. In our City Hall, it's going to be a Democrat. We don't have that same kind of partisan race going on. But looking at that, is that going to have any impact on what happens as far as the shutdown goes? And the reason I ask that question is, if it doesn't look like the Democrats in the races have been hurt by what the Democratic Party is doing and our Democratic representatives at the national level with this shutdown and holding out, maybe it hasn't been bad for the Democrats. Maybe this is going to make the Republicans say, well, we got to move on this because it's not having the impact on them.
Well, it's certainly the argument that the Democrats have been making throughout this entire process is the shutdown is not their doing. This is they're trying to stand fast by their principles, protecting health care, and the Republicans are refusing to budge. So one could take a look at this and say this in the few cases where people are able to vote in nationwide or across the country in terms of these contests, that this would indicate that the Democrats are winning that argument. As far as the shutdown goes, we were talking before about Congresswoman-elect Grijalva and whoever winds up emerging from this race. Until the shutdown is finished, they're not likely to be able to take their seats.
Right. But I guess my thing is that I think that I don't want to say a referendum, but if enough Democrats win in enough places, Jeronimo, can they say it was a referendum on the Democratic policies and the Democratic beliefs and that people are turning against the Republican Party? And on top of that, does it help or hurt going into the midterms? Because then does that put more fuel under the Republicans if the Democrats play this too big right now?
Well, yeah, but when you look at the campaigns that both candidates in Virginia and New Jersey and obviously New York City played, it was, let's say, a prelude to the Trump effect. And we have to remember 2018, when we had the midterm elections. That was a disastrous election for the Republican Party. Yeah. The question now is, I think, in my mind, for the midterm election, and if this is a real referendum, yes, I agree with you in the sense of, is this referendum going to last for a year, or people are going to say no? So we just have to wait and see.
Wait and see we will. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with me this evening. We're going to wrap up our coverage at this point. I want to thank Andrew Schneider and Jeronimo Cortina for being with us. Also, I want to thank Harris County Clerk Tanisha Hudspeth for joining in, and our field reporters, Bianca Seward, Dominic Anthony Walsh, Michael Atkinson, and Natalie Weber. Remember, coverage will continue here on News 88.7. Live coverage will begin tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. for the latest results and full Election Day results. Also, reminder, tune in to Houston Matters at 9 a.m. and then again 11 a.m. for Hello Houston. I believe, Andrew, you're going to be on both of those shows.
And Texas Standard.
And Texas Standard. So, and also go to HoustonPublicMedia.org for more of the latest results. Thank you.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from listeners like you and from the Houston Ballet, presenting Stanton Welch's The Nutcracker. The holiday tradition returns to the Wortham Theater next Friday. Tickets available at HoustonBallet.org.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from Hildebrand MBA at UT Austin's Macomb School of Business, offering the Weekend MBA at Houston. Campus visit November 8th. Details at TexasMBAEvents.com. Make it here.
My name is Michael Lawson, Houston Market President of St. Luke's